Hello and welcome to Speightstown, a forgotten treasure. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Once again, I'm glad you've joined us. In our last program, we looked at the businesses, the families, the people and the events that drove Speightstown. Now, there's a piece of land to the north of the town known as Haywoods. Haywoods was for many years a public recreational area enjoyed by visitors and Barbadians alike. Haywoods and Speightstown are inextricably linked. For that reason, Haywoods merits inclusion in this program, Speightstown, a forgotten treasure.
I remember actually it was Haywoods Plantation, and Haywoods actually was a very large estate, one of those estates in St. Peter. If I remember correctly, I think there were about, the historians might be able to tell you more so than I would, but there were about 30 odd estates in St. Peter, of which Haywoods was one.
Of course, Haywoods in itself, when I grew up in Speightstown, in this area, it was a big plantation. Lots of cane, and between the cane, lots of yam and eddos and sweet potatoes, the traditional plantation. And we would go down there, and I remember people digging yams and digging potatoes. And the amount of money that they paid was almost negligible. But at that time, it might have been considered a lot by them. But wages were not high. People ate a lot more ground provision and so on.
Where the marina is now sited, you had quite a few, I would have to say, springs, and I would think springs still exist in that general area at the north of the marina. But this is a site, if people who would have left these shores somewhere in the 60s come back and see it now, I'm sure that they'll be surprised, whether pleasantly or otherwise. They really would be surprised to see, this sort of development.
The other aspect of Haywoods is the seaside. This was where all young people played. We played beach cricket. In the vacation, we roasted breadfruit and flying fish. We went for sea eggs. You took your mother's wash pan and you went down there. You put on a pair of old, as we would call them, pumps, software, and you went out into the sea and you picked them up. The sea eggs were just there sitting, waiting to be taken. And we would clean them on the beach. Sometimes we would borrow the frying pan from home and we would fry up sea egg with the seasoning and all that. Sometimes you didn't go home for the whole day because there was so much to eat. And people were so friendly, you could go to any of the residents of what was then Haywoods Village, which extended from just past the last house on your left after you leave Sand Street, all the way into the area where the hotel is now. There was a village on both sides of the road there, Haywoods Village. That is true, a lot of people don't know that.
When I used to go to Scott Coast and Parry, Haywoods, that was just like creation, just wooded area, just trees. And the area where they built the marina now, that was a whole big pasture. Where people still got cows out there, sheep, what are you talking about before the highway cut, a whole big pasture. And there used to be a lot of coconut trees. We used to leave school. They had roads cut at the time, but all the lots, everything was like just bushy area. So we used to like leave school and come down and take the back road.
Like Keith Cumberbatch, Reynold McLean is a past student of the Coleridge and Parry School. Although students were forbidden from walking the back hill, an adventurous Reynold McLean made a trek from time to time and made his way onto the Haywoods estate.
At that time, consisted of also a duck pond where birds used to migrate, and they had a house there for people who bird watching. Also, there were some people who hunted birds. The beach was pretty wide, and turtles used to nest there freely. The reefs were back then in very good shape, because I myself dived off Haywoods and saw some lovely marine life, which sadly we don't see these days. The road that joins Speightstown and Six Mines went along parallel to the beach. And the old mill wall, which still stands on the Alma Beach property, was a prominent feature of the land below.
remember in my boy days too, like the excursions, like picnics on Sundays, because like Sunday, it was a community at my time. Sunday was like the beach day for the community, the neighborhood. Everybody used to come to the sea at that time. And then we would venture all through here, and then we would meet people, excursionary families. We used to meet friends. I mean, it was so loving at that time. Like, imagine we coming from my court hall where we live in, and we coming in here as boys in the sea, and we come and people on the beach and picnicking, and they would invite us to come and share in the food and that, and then we would play games with them on the beach. We would bathe together. We would, like certain parts of the sea, like might be dangerous, I don't know. We would make sure we would pick courts for them. It was really beautiful. Haywards was a lovely place before all this development really started to set in.
As children, we had the whole Haywards plantation to play in because it was a lot of expanse land and a lot of dunks trees and fruit trees, and you felt freedom. You could leave school on evenings and come down what they call the back hill. It was not encouraged. You come down the back hill and you will get into Six Mains pretty fast. It was another way to get to Church Street as well. All the plantation had tracks through it that us boys could go up and down quite easily. For us who live here in Speightstown, it was a straight road. But being a scout leader next to Haywards Plantation, it was my duty to teach then all the youngsters and people in the area about the history of the place. And also we had the freedom of using the land next to Haywards as part of our camping grounds and part of our training ground. We were quite fortunate to have that, and the pond that went with it in the early years. The bridge, which is next to Haywards, is still in existence because it joins Speightstown to Haywards. That is called St. Helena's Bridge, and I don't think too many people know the name of that bridge. But yes, that's called St. Helena's Bridge. It joins Orange Street onto the Haywards property.
I'm going to illustrate the kind of fear that people had walking through Haywards. A number of our members came from Six Mains, so they had to walk through Haywards, we would call it Haywards trees. Haywards Plantation had some big dogs. And I remember an old lady, she was about 89. When I go to visit her, she would say a sentence or two, and then she would say, and here was dogs, and here was dogs. I remember running, and when the Lord brought us through Haywards from those dogs were really, they struck fear in people. And out Haywards was dark. I mean really dark, because there were trees on either side of the road, and then there was the sea. And we would walk from all here down to Six Mains, keeping open air. And so you had to go through Haywards trees. And those persons from down there were so very faithful. Twice on mornings, because they would be up on Sunday mornings and back down, and then on Sunday nights they would be back here again for a service, even though fear of Haywards trees was in them. And I really thank God for them, because they set a very good example for me, which I now, with all the transportation and so forth, I really remember the sacrifices they made. Haywards trees was dread. It was dread. Haywards Beach was also very popular. And to the north of Haywards Beach also, that was extremely popular. And I remember that too, because I almost drowned down there sometime. But that was a very, very popular beach. When they took over, when it was sold, I think a lot of people were disadvantaged. I remember taking lots of people from this church when we had youth fellowship, and children's service, and so down to here was trees, and we would just have a little picnic or something like that. That was something that was a great loss to the community. Fearful at night, but very pleasant and handy in the day.
Remember correctly, here was developing, which was here was hotel at that time, right? But in the, if I may say, the Tom Adams regime during that time, where the construction company by the name of Bernard Sundley, who would have done most of the development on the hotel itself.
This is Haywards Holiday Village, a project costing a total of 60 million Barbados dollars. New plans project that it will welcome its first guests in November, but construction at the sprawling site has been dogged by a number of delays, several strikes, and shortage of building material. Bernard Sundley, the firm that's contracted for the job, is expected to send several directors from Britain to get a first-hand look at the progress, or lack of it. They're expected later this month. Project manager Rudy Matthews hopes the village will be handed over to the village administrators in time for them to train staff. According to an official of Bernard Sundley here in Barbados, efforts are being made to put an end to undue delays. When completed, Haywards will consist of 5 hotels, 2 apartels, totaling 306 rooms. There'll also be an administration building, shopping area, central restaurant, discotheque, meeting hall, beach market, a sports center, and other recreational facilities. I'm Emmanuel Joseph for World Scene.
Emmanuel Joseph reporting back in the 1980s on the progress of the construction of the Haywards Holiday Village. Now, as you are aware, Haywards enjoyed an interesting history which is not the subject of this program. From Haywards, we return to the heart of Speightstown, Orange Street to be precise. It is the area that was known for fishing, its jetty, and of course the placement of its fish market.
I remember how the fishermen used to sit on the bridge just past the fish market, and in the evenings they would talk about all the adventures they had during the day and about the big ones that they lost, and sometimes with all the expletives.
The fish market we have today is a far cry from what we had in the early times. We have a picture of the fish market in 1948 when the bridge was washed away in a flood. As you know, Speightstown is a flood-prone town. And that fish market is a far cry from what we have now. That was just what we would call probably a makeshift. It had a roof, it had uprights. But when the the bridge was washed away in 1948 and the whole rebuilding program went on, then the fish market also got an uplift.
We got Fort Orange, Speightstown Fish Market. That's one of the earliest fish markets you ever had. It's in 1953. That's 61 years.
I remember my mother sending me down to the market to buy fish. And she would give me $5 or $4 because there are times when you didn't need all of that. Fish was what they call all a penny. And you came down, you got 100 fish for $1. Yes, I remember those days because I hated them, because when you could get 100 fish for $1, it meant you were scaling fish for the rest of the evening and you had to help. You couldn't get away. You had to help scale the fish. But sometimes, you know, if they weren't selling like that, you know, they were selling, you know, 10 cents for one or whatever. If you came, I helped to pull in the boats that were bringing in the fish, because the big launches would be off in the sea, but then the smaller boats would take the fish and bring them in. So if you went, held on to the boat and helped to pull that boat in, you got a fish or two. So you came down and you helped to pull in as many as you can, and you tried to save some money. Or you got the ones that you were rewarded with, and then you turned around and bought the ones that you were supposed to buy, so that there would be even more fish to go around.
And so we would go down by the jetty, the one near Challoner store. It was Challoner then. Afterwards it became Manning, Wilkinson, and Challoner. And we would just get a line, a fish line, and hook jacks. Yeah, we would hook jacks and not for a long period because, you know, as girls, we were not allowed to do certain things, but you would still get away and do them from time to time. And another thing that we used to do is just behind where well, they used to call it the Arms House, just down the road. There was, when the sea was very, very calm, tide was low, you could walk for about 50 meters out. I mean, really, really far. And we would go out there and get sea eggs. That time I used to eat sea eggs. I don't eat anything like that anymore. But you get the sea eggs and you come home and you know, my mother would just do them up for us in just over Queen Street area.
Well, it seems to be a special thing here in Speightstown. Young Coral Richards was not alone. Another little girl from right here in historic Speightstown enjoyed her experiences of fishing.
This fishing, and many people's first fishing, was done on the wharf. Not this wharf that is here, but the one that was just to the south of the Fisherman's Pub. Right at the exit of one of those big bonds where you push the sugar down. And I remember, I must have been about 3 or 4 years old, and a little line was put in my hand by my father, and he said, if anything, pull on that line, pull back. That was my first instruction for fishing. But then as I got bigger, I started to go fishing with my brothers, and they taught me how to row. You had to learn how to row. I had to learn how to cast, not a big net, but there was a small little net that you used to cast for getting bait and that sort of thing. And there was a dip net. You had to learn to use those things, because if you're going fishing, you can't go there and be a prima donna. You had to be part of the, you had to work.
Yes. Fishing is a special skill which you acquire through practice. It is not simply a matter of throwing a net into the sea and retrieving that net. Special techniques include hand gathering, spearing, netting, angling and trapping, as Peggy McGeary explains.
You had to be educated and learn a lot of things about fishing. I thought it was just toss the line overboard and whatever, but you were told things like, if you feel your bait bobbing about in the water, or something is pulling at the bait, just bobbing, 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 let it happen for a little while, because that most likely is a fish with a bill like a barracuda, and he's trying to get that in. So I was taught to strike, and to strike in fisherman's term is to draw the line in suddenly to hook it into the fish, most likely in his gills or wherever, because that's where you're going to haul him in from. And so if you felt that little bobbing, 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 you let it happen, and you're thinking, this may be a barracuda or something with a bill, but you follow the instructions, and then you came home with your strike.
Evidently, when fishing at sea, the view of the little boat, the surrounding water, and the distant land might perhaps lend itself to a poetic rendition of a special feeling that you could experience. For Peggy, her fishing expedition in the sea off Speightstown made for a different analogy, and quite an interesting one.
Fishing was, I don't know, another lifeline, and it was especially at night when you went out there, you felt so puny. You know, you realize all you're seeing above you, there's this mass of water and the stars above you, and you feel like nothing. It is a humbling experience. We were already humble, but it was even more humbling because you felt, I don't know, this vast universe, and you felt so small, you felt so tiny out there, and you realized that at the slightest turn of anything, something could happen.
And that something which could occur at any moment became very real for Peggy's brothers.
Now and again, I remember once a whale ran my two brothers who were somewhere in the north as well, and there was this whale, and one brother said to the other, I think I see a whale spout. And the other one said, whale what? But then they were aware of the fact that lots of launches, the bigger boats, were passing them and heading south. And I remember them saying to my mother, one of them said to my mother, I don't remember which one of them, but one of them said to my mother, Mommy, where I stood up on the bow of the boat and I saw the whale, Mommy, it looked like a house spot. It was so big. They got scared, and instead of just rowing, I think they put the oar up and attached a big piece of cloth that they had to it so that the wind would push them as well. And my poor mother is up here not knowing what to believe, and my father, always never panicked. And he's saying to her, just take it easy and wait. Just take it easy and wait. Those boys aren't foolish. Those boys aren't foolish. They know how to handle themselves. And I wasn't sure what to believe either, but I just remember tagging on to my mother's skirt tails and being scared that my brothers were in danger. But
all is well that ends well. Thankfully, Peggy's brothers returned home safely. Now, not only was this area the starting point of many a fishing expedition here in Speightstown, it was the site of Orange Fort. The evidence of that fortification once dotted the landscape here.
When the Ministry of Agriculture come with rural development or something was in charge of that, they can't let me sign a check away. So nobody knows. But that was a fort. Why we can't build replicas of these forts and let you see? That's Fort Orange. 5 cannons gone from there. 5.
We've lost over 25 cannons that were originally in Speightstown to the garrison.
A meeting to discuss the redevelopment of Speightstown was held at Haywards a few years ago. The cannons were already removed from this location. Clement Armstrong, the proprietor of the Fisherman's Pub, attended that meeting and inquired of an official why were the cannons removed from this location.
Tell me we moved up for safekeeping. But I asked him his glass. And there was glasses. Like you get break. These fellas just make remarks, feed that they're making laugh. But these certain things that hit you and hit the that's a body blow that he felt he made laughing sport at me. He sent them for safekeeping. So I said, with the glasses then, everybody bursting and laughing, you know. But I ain't getting them back yet.
And it's a shame that those cannons have been all removed. I'd like to see a cannon right back here, because that would be a wonderful attraction both for the children and for the visitors to be reminded of the old history of Barbados when warfare was the way things worked. And those cannons are very, very evocative symbols of that period of continuing warfare. I'd like to see a cannon back right here.
You go down Fort Denmark, you see the road, soon you can't get down there because the road caving in. Can't get through it. One cannon down there. But it still got muskets and things in the sea, and cannons in the sea. Off there, which is our rich heritage things we have there. We got the University of London come here every October. And go out there and dive, and nobody knows what's picking up. We ain't gonna police, they ain't gonna our artifacts. There are no Half Moon Fort. About 3 years ago, they find a pipe that small. I asked the guy, that pipe was very small. He said when tobacco was king, they couldn't afford a pipe bigger than that. I ain't seen any paper out here that it was reported and get to the museum.
It calls attention to the recurring question in the heritage debate. Whose heritage is it? And the leading question to that, where should these artifacts be displayed?
We got a Speightstown Fish Market. 1953, they tell you. They can't put that sign. They can't put it was a former Fort Orange.
Well, the answer, of course, is yes. A plaque bearing the information requested by Clement Armstrong could be easily erected on the building of the fish market. And so that brings us to the end of yet another program in the series. Certainly you must be prepared by now to answer the question which we have been asking ever since the start of the program. Is Speightstown a forgotten treasure? Until next week at the same time, on air and online, I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Good evening.